Welcome to this edition of Great Books, a lively discussion of a selection from the canon of exceptional literature. Here's your host, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. Thanks for joining us for the Great Book Show. I'm Jack Hatfield. David will give us an introduction to the selections. David?
Today we're going to discuss two short stories by the great Russian writer Anton Chekhov. Chekhov was born into a middle-class family in southern Russia in 1860. He was a medical doctor and maintained a successful practice throughout his short life, while turning out plays such as The Cherry Orchard and Uncle Vanya, which continue to be performed today, and dozens of masterful short stories. Chekhov died of tuberculosis at age 44 in 1904. Unlike the prevailing modes of fiction at the time, or Russian fiction in the late 19th century, Chekhov was less concerned with neat plots and storytelling than elliptical portrayals of morally ambiguous situations and people's inner dialogues. One of our stories is Gooseberries from 1898. The plot is simple. Two friends, Ivan Ivanovich and Birkin, go out for a walk and get caught in a rainstorm. They seek shelter at their friend Alehin's estate close by. Alehin invites them to stay and offers a welcome bath and a swim to his guests. The voluptuousness of Alehin's estate and the bath remind Ivan Ivanovich of his brother Nikolai, who devotedly saved money to escape his office job, buy the small farm of his dreams, and raise gooseberries. Ivan Ivanovich disapproves of such a life, which he calls monastic, egotistical, and lazy. He feels Nikolai's life as a retreat from the responsibilities of life. But his brother was happy, pleased with his bourgeois life. He serves his brother some gooseberries. Nikolai savors each one, but Ivan Ivanovich finds them bitter. He resents the complacency he sees in his brother while there is suffering in the world. Suddenly, Ivan Ivanovich fears that he too may be happy. But is being happy enough? One must also do good. What's bothering Ivan Ivanovich? And what's on his mind? The other story is Enemies, written in 1887. The Dr. Kirilov is summoned to save Abigin's dying wife, just as Kirilov's 6-year-old son dies of diphtheria. Kirilov resents Abigin's need when he, Kirilov, sees that it's time to mourn and console his wife. The men become enemies as they concentrate on their own needs. Please join us as we try to sort out Chekhov's characters' neuroses.
I thought we'd do Enemies first and then Gooseberries second. And in Enemies, why did they become enemies?
Well, I think they were both so interested in their own problems that they didn't recognize or have any sympathy or empathy for the other guy's problem. And the doctor was angry because he leaves his home and his wife when his son died to find out that, what's his name?
The other guy.
Abigin?
The other guy, yeah.
Abigin?
Yeah.
Abigin's wife is really not dead, that she pulled a trick on him to go away with another man, and he thought this guy ought to know that, and he left his wife and, and his dead child to try and save his wife. So the doctor's really angry at that situation. The other guy can't understand why the doctor doesn't understand the tragedy that's happened to him. Yeah, so I think they're so concentrated on their own problems. And I think the word enemy is a little strong for their relationship, by the way. I don't think they knew each other a couple of hours.
I thought they were enemies.
Yeah, you did think they were enemies?
I think that by the end of the story,
yeah, the end of the story, yeah.
I was going to suggest doing that 1 second, because it sounds like you just got all the juice out of it that there is just now. I don't know. Maybe there's more to it.
You mean that's the story?
That's it.
Let me ask a question then. Is one of the doctor, when he got angry at the other guy, what he was using was class warfare. Went on and on about how this other guy had all this money, and he was, you know, lived in fancy house and on and on. And I was wondering why he picked that as something to get angry, to express his anger in those terms.
Yeah, I saw when they describe the characters, they describe the doctor, who's not a peasant, but is being more peasant-like and rough, and Abigail is being very refined. And then the doctor does go and yell at him for, why are you involving me in this farce? You know, how can you do this? You look down upon people and you use them.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way the doctor felt, because after Abigail finds out that his wife has left and isn't lying in the sickbed, he doesn't immediately say to the doctor, all right, go back home to your wife. Instead, he sits down and starts telling him the story of how he met his wife and always loved his wife, and goes on. And the doctor just can't believe that he's being so insensitive as to not let him go right away. But both people are very unhappy, and when you're unhappy, you sort of get overwhelmed by your sorrow, and you get very selfish. And maybe that's a time where you have to be selfish, because you're trying to survive this terrible shock to your system.
What I thought was funny is the old adage, misery loves company. And that's the, you know, common wisdom, but these people don't want to share. They don't want the company. They just want to retreat to themselves, and they build walls around themselves. Each of them is only concerned with his own misery, and doesn't understand the misery of the other.
Well, there's a quote from the story that goes, the unhappy are egoistic, spiteful, unjust, cruel, and less capable of understanding each other than fools. Unhappiness does not bring people together, but draws them apart. And even where one would fancy people would be united by the similarity of their sorrow, far more injustice and cruelty is generated than in comparatively placid surroundings. And
I was just going to read
that's the gist,
Yeah,
right
that's
there.
Yeah.
I mean, that says it right there. You figure both these people lost somebody, one to death and one ran away, and that did not bring them together because they could not look beyond themselves.
There was another character in here, at least I read it, and that was the setting. Let me read what he said. In all nature, there seemed to be a feeling of hopelessness and pain. The earth, like a ruined woman sitting alone in a dark room and trying not to think of the past, was brooding over memories of spring. I just love that line. Everything was dark and everything. So
I agree. The setting was described very well in both these stories.
Yes. The first time I read it, I go, this is kind of, you know, big deal. And then I started reading, and these paragraphs just jumped out at me. So. Shall we go on to Gooseberries, or anything else about it?
Yeah, I want to go back to that term, the title, enemy, again, okay? When you have an enemy, you're usually against something they stand for. What did they stand for?
The doctor said that he stood for an upper class that thought only of themselves and weren't considerate of other people's feelings, right? Which was true in this story.
And Abigail's feeling towards the doctor, what did the doctor stand for?
The doctor said that he was just using him, you know, like for his pleasure.
Like
a
utility. He offers
like
him
a utility,
money.
yes.
Yeah, right. Okay.
I thought it was a real class thing. I think the other guy, not the doctor, looked at the end, was using a little bit of class vocabulary to beat down the doctor. I forgot just what he said, but it was something like, you know, you peasant, how dare you?
Okay.
Oh, he said people get whipped or thrashed for saying things like, you just said to me, doctor.
Right.
And I mean, who says that to somebody other than somebody who's like upper class, looking down on someone?
In their defense, they didn't say, the doctor didn't say to him, do you realize I came here and I lost my son?
We did say that.
He did it many times.
Well,
Not at the end.
not
at the end.
Okay. Well, anyhow.
Well, why don't we
Okay.
go on to Gooseberries?
Which also talks about class.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also talks about unhappiness and happiness.
That's okay. What is he? What's Chekhov saying about happiness there?
Eat gooseberries. Or don't eat gooseberries and you're unhappy. Excuse me. Eat gooseberries and you're happy.
It's like this man dreams of something for his whole life, and then he gets it. He wants to own some land and be important, right? And have gooseberries. And when he sits down and he eats the first of his gooseberries, they're sour. But he thinks they're delicious. Yeah. But the brother tastes them and says they're sour. And it's his dream. And I thought it was very strange the way the brother immediately, looking at his happy brother who now owns the farm and now has gooseberries, immediately changes inside himself and goes, it's not right that people be happy because there's unhappy people underneath them who makes their happiness possible. Mm-hmm. But then he describes how everybody looks happy, and it's not right that they be happy, and he can't stand looking in the windows of the town and seeing happy people because somewhere there must be unhappy people who allow some people to be happy.
What do you think the gooseberries represented?
The dream.
Yeah,
the dream?
I think, yeah, dream.
It's the goal.
That was his goal, not my goal, but it was his goal.
Then the brother, Nikolai, is the one that ended up with 300 or 400 acres and 20 bushes of gooseberries.
Yeah. Right.
When the brother tasted the gooseberries, okay, what happened to him? What change took place?
He said, well, it wasn't there. I mean, he didn't like as Maureen said, he found bitter. But a little bit later, he said, my brother's very happy, and I have despair over that. And then he goes into what?
I was wondering if some of it wasn't selfishness. You know, that all his life, he described his brother as being miserly and not wearing good clothes and not marrying a woman he loved, just marrying somebody for money and then driving her through spending very little money on her to death. And, you know, he looked down on his brother all the time. And all of a sudden, his brother is a landowner. And that comes with him being able to tell the people who work for him, you know, his opinions about things. And all of a sudden, he's important. And he has his dream. He worked for 30, 40 years for his dream, and finally he has it. And all of a sudden, his brother decides it's not right that somebody be happy. And I was wondering how much selfishness was involved in that he was jealous maybe of his brother.
Let's go back to the gooseberries themselves, because we were talking about whether they're sweet or whether they're bitter. And we don't know whether they really are sweet or bitter. The brother,
Nikolai,
the other brother, Ivan Ivanovich, he thinks they're bitter. Could that be sour grapes?
Yeah.
Okay, because he's not rich, and he's denigrating his brother's happiness, saying there's so much suffering in the world. How dare he enjoy this bourgeois existence? And the biggest thrill of his bourgeois existence is to eat these gooseberries. Well, I got news for you, buddy. They're not great. They're bitter.
But he was even unhappy that the people who worked for him were happy. Because he says, well, they shouldn't be happy because my brother gives them vodka. You know, they should be miserable working for my brother. But they're not. They're happy. And he's completely against this. Yes, it kills him that people are happy. And who does he tell the story to? He tells the story to his friend Dworkin, and someone else who is a rich landowner.
That's right, where they spend the night.
Who listens to the story and is not really interested in the story because he says, well, it has nothing to do with me. But he's telling the story about a rich landowner, his brother, who shouldn't be happy, to another happy landowner.
Well, one of the things that occurred to me is that Ivan Ivanovich, whose brother is Nikolai, the gooseberry guy, when they go to Elaine's place, Ivan is the one who enjoys the swimming and the bath. It's this voluptuousness. He just loves the swimming, and he wants to stay doing it more than the other guys. So he's actually partaking in the bourgeois pleasures that he reviles. And that's why he's so upset about enjoying being happy with a bourgeois lifestyle, because he suspects himself.
David, is there another instant that you can point to where he enjoys that bourgeois life? Because that's the only one I can think of.
Well, there's that, and then there's this kind of I got to find a kind of a revelation that when he says they're happy, maybe I'm happy too.
Yeah, that's towards the end.
Yeah, and he...
that's before he eats the gooseberries, I think.
Well, it's telling that he suspects himself of being happy, because he shouldn't want to be happy if bourgeois is evil.
He goes, that night I was able to understand how I too had been content and happy. I too, at meals or hunting, used to lay down the law about living. Because one of the things he complained about his brother was that his brother was telling the peasants how to live. And he was going, well, I tell them that too, but nobody listens to him because he's not a landowner. Right? That he listened to Nikolai because they work for him and because he gives them vodka. you know?
I was reading quite differently. That I thought the author Chekhov really was against the Nikolai. I mean, he's describing when they first go on to the Nikolai's property, that the dog looks like a pig, and the cook looks like a pig, and his brother looks like a pig, and then they go on and they explain it as his brother at one time was meek and kind, and then he turned into this pompous ass.
No, but he also says he was living this life of poverty, and not caring about anything but saving money, and not living a very fulfilling life. So he wasn't saying, I don't think he was saying that. Especially, how do you deal with this sentence? Happiness does not exist, nor should it. And if there is any meaning or purpose in life, they're not in our peddling little happiness, but in something reasonable and grand. Do good. I mean, is it the purpose of life to be
I think
happy?
I think there's something that reconciles all that. I think the key is the quote from Pushkin, where he says, "Dearer to us the falsehood that exalts than hosts of baser truths." So the baser truths are the suffering in the world, and the falsehood that exalts is the bourgeois lifestyle. And so it's painful to think about the suffering in the world or the reality besides the opulence of life. And so this guy doesn't think about the suffering in the world. He thinks about his gooseberries.
Okay, but think of the opulence that you're talking about. The guy has several hundred acres, but it's by a river that's brown and by some kind of rundown factory, right? And it's not beautiful looking at all, and all the gooseberries
but
aren't even.
But he's happy.
Good tasting.
Is defined by contrast.
Yeah, but his importance is self-importance. He calls himself Lord. He wasn't a lord. He was a peasant, who was rich.
Yeah, and he had people that serfs, I don't know if he didn't use those term, under him.
Yeah, he said his grandfather was a peasant. His father owned a little bit of property and was a soldier.
Right.
And then he had to sell it to pay debts.
Yeah, right.
So they went from that owning a little bit back to
But
not owning.
that goes back to the Pushkin, though, because even in this supposed opulence, which is actually squalor, it's the lie they tell themselves in order to be happy.
Is that wrong?
Is
to
that
tell
law?
yourself a lie to be happy? If you're living in squalor?
It's
What's wrong
reality.
with being happy?
It's the reality that we don't want to admit that we're living in squalor because we refuse to think about it and just glom on gooseberries.
Okay, so what does
He didn't
even do about it? He just goes complaining about it. He says, oh, I'd do something about it if I were young, but I'm not young. So he just goes around telling people you should not be happy.
Isn't he the one that's asking, why should we wait? Why don't we take advantage?
Oh, that's true.
Huh? Isn't he? That's a contradiction, isn't it?
Because he's not doing anything. He's just thinking.
But he's the one that's asking that question. Grab it now while you can, and which seems to me like a contradiction.
He's ambivalent.
Yeah.
He wants to be bourgeois too.
Yeah.
See, I don't think that he lived in squalor. I think he was very happy.
Nikolai, we're talking about.
Was very happy with what he's
I
what he's
said it
living
wasn't
with.
opulence. He used the word
maybe.
opulence.
There's opulence and there's opulence.
Right.
Yeah. I thought he was quite happy, and he had people. He had what he wanted.
Yeah.
So-
After a whole life spent pitching
Some people
pennies.
never get it.
But he got it. And
He got
it.
So-
It's
and
the
I think-
falsehood that exalts.
And I think that the key part in this that Ivan was having trouble with him was he was saying, like you were saying at the start, that Nikolai had gotten over by taking it from other people, and that he said happiness by itself is not any good, but doing good is kind of the epitome of.
What's Chekhov telling us in this story? Huh?
I think he's trying to say that sitting back and just enjoying, the kind of the surface part of life is not enough, that you have to do good in life. That's what I thought.
You think that's it?
I thought so.
Yeah. And that you shouldn't look at just the happiness on the surface. You should look and see what causes that happiness to be allowed.
Well, there isn't any real happiness, is there? Or would you call Nikolai's contentment, his satisfaction, that he got his farm, is that happiness, getting that stuff? Is that what the author is saying?
That's what Nikolai's saying.
Yes,
Nikolai's saying that, yeah.
But the thing that Ivan said that I didn't like was that it was wrong for the peasants to be happy.
Well, because there's so much
realize
misery in the
how
world.
horrible their life
Yeah.
is. And I mean, if they're living a horrible life, don't begrudge them their happiness.
Yeah.
All right, maybe help them have a better life, but that's not what Ivan is saying. Well, he does go, you should grab some freedom when you can. But
why wait?
He's saying you have to start by not being happy.
He's talking out of both sides of his mouth, I think.
Yeah.
In what way?
Well, he says, don't be happy, and then he thinks he might be happy. There's no evidence that he's been doing good.
But he's been spending money while his brother's been saving it, which is why he can't afford to buy property.
And he touches happiness when he jumps in the lake.
That's right.
So,
But that kind of happiness, anyone could go swimming in the river. I
not
think
enjoy
was a
it
river.
like that. I mean,
that's true.
He was really getting into it.
Right.
I guess I was his gooseberries, the feel of the water.
I always thought gooseberries is equivalent to rosebud. So, what do you think, to ask Bob's question again, what do you think Chekhov is saying here? I think he's talking about class, like you were saying.
Definitely talking about class.
Yeah, and he's talking about bourgeois. He's talking about true happiness. And he doesn't really define, I didn't think, true happiness.
Well, I like the fact that one of the stories was about happiness and how you shouldn't you should see below the surface of happiness. And the other story, Enemies, was about unhappiness and how that changes you. And in both of them, they had this class warfare between two different classes, the peasants and the upper class.
Do you really think that Ivan was happy?
He said he thought he was happy. And then he definitely wasn't happy after he saw how his brother was living.
But he enjoyed the gooseberries, didn't he?
No, he said the gooseberries were sour.
Yeah,
right?
they were sour, yeah. So
Nikolai, who grew the gooseberries and always
Yeah.
wanted him, said they were delicious. But that's a good point. Maybe they were delicious and they
Yeah,
weren't
who knows?
just delicious to Ivan.
Yeah.
it could be just
Sour grapes.
sour grapes. Exactly, yeah. Jealous of his brother,
Yeah.
who made it, yeah. But I don't think Chekhov was, because he made a real point that he effectively, he said he married an ugly woman and
For the money.
and then kept her from
Enjoying her money.
Yeah, enjoying her, and she died from it.
Yeah.
Didn't
Right.
even feed her right. So Chekhov was not on the side of
But
Nikolai.
I like the way the homeowner, at the end, after he heard the story, he did not trouble to think whether what Ivan Ivanovich had been saying was clever or right. His guests were talking of neither groats nor hay nor tar, but of something which had no bearing on his life.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of cool myself.
And I mean, this whole story, I think, is for his benefit, because he was a landowner like Nikolai was. And,
He said, "Let's go
so
to
Ivan
bed."
wasn't doing anything
Yeah.
that got results, wasn't helping anybody be happy.
Yeah, I agree. So
Yeah, they thought it was boring. They'd rather talk about beautiful women and elegant people,
yeah. Well,
the surfacey stuff.
I hadn't read this sort of stuff by Chekhov before. I've read a lot of Chekhov, and I just enjoyed paragraphs in both stories. I'd read it, and he just has a real way with words.
Oh, and again, the description of the room, the description of the farm, and even the rainstorm as they were started out in the beginning of
It's
the
pretty
story.
tightly constructed.
Yeah,
Yes.
Yeah.
Not a spare word. Every word is there for a reason.
And he's somewhat like Shakespeare. He doesn't bring out his theme or his clearly. I mean, it's, you read Shakespeare and you go, what's Shakespeare really saying here? And it doesn't reduce down like this. And neither does Chekhov. It doesn't reduce down to a short paragraph. This story is about, so. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Join us next time as we discuss another great selection. As Aristotle said, the best way to learn is to get together in small groups and discuss great ideas.